All right. Well, good morning, everyone. It's great to see a good crowd. Appreciate everyone's presence. We're right in the middle of the Phillips Seminary special series, and today we are honored to have Reverend Dr. Lisa Davison, graduate PhD from Vanderbilt, wrote what looks to be a really interesting book about preaching the women of the Bible. And today we are fortunate to have her talking about Rowdy Broads of the Hebrew Bible, Women Who Get Things Done, which is an awesome title. And with that, I will hand it over to Reverend Davison. And let's give her a welcome.
Make certain I don't trip on anything.
Sure.
Okay. Good morning.
Good morning.
Let's see what I can do with my PowerPoint here. I do this all the time, but every little mouse pad is different.
Yeah, no,
I'm just moving.
All right.
Moving down here because I can see.
And let me see if I can find our people.
I always use the live mouse, so I'm not going to be much help, probably.
All right. Those of you joining us by Zoom, are you seeing the slide?
No, not yet.
Okay. Thank you. I thought I haven't shared it yet. That would explain why. It's supposed to read my mind, isn't it? All right. Let's see. Let's do this one. How about now?
That looks good.
All right. Now, I need to go back to my piece here. All righty. So, thank you all for the invitation to come. I have known Todd for quite some time. We've been in a group together with OCCJ, and he has been the Presbyterian formation person for us at Phillips. So I've known him, but I've never been to this congregation before. So I'm excited to join you today. I've heard good things about you. As John mentioned, or Gary mentioned, John, thank you. I have written a great deal in different places on women in the Hebrew Bible, which is my kind of passion. My first book was Preaching the Women of the Bible. Last year, I had a book published called More Than a Womb, Child-Free Women as Divine Agents, or Agents of the Divine, in which I looked at women who are never described in the Hebrew Bible as either a mother or barren, but are known in the story for doing something other than bearing children, which back in the ancient world, ancient Near East, Israel's history, women's primary function was to birth children, and particularly sons. Mainly, there are a couple of things going on there, but the primary reason was that life in that time was very precarious. Some estimates say that only 90% of children survived infancy in that early period in the ancient Near East. Mothers often died while they were pregnant or in childbirth, so you had to reproduce as much as possible in order to make certain the generation continued. But when we run across these women, and we're going to talk about one of them today in particular, who are doing something else in the story, sometimes something that, roles that we associate with men rather than women, it makes you take note. Why are these women in the story? And I've done research on was it even possible for women to choose to be what we call today child-free. Not childless, because that seems like you're lacking. I myself am child-free by choice. My companion and I decided that our lives were full. We didn't have a desire to raise our own children. And you'd be surprised, even in 2023, the problems that can cause when people tell me I will never know what it's like to be a woman until I have a child. And I would never know love and compassion until I had had a child. And I thought, well, okay, whatever you think. So anyway, that's kind of where we are today. My focus is to talk about a couple of women as we have time, who I call Rowdy Broads of the Hebrew Bible. Someone stole the title Bad Girls of the Bible. There's a book there. But I don't think of them as bad. I think of them as rowdy. And they are often the women who get things done when men are not always on track. In fact, as you read through the Hebrew Bible, you start to see that often God's desires are made known to women before they're made known to men. So think about it. Rebecca knew which son was supposed to inherit the covenant. It was supposed to be Jacob, but he was the younger son, and Isaac wanted Esau to get the covenant because the eldest son was supposed to do that. So Rebecca knew something because God told her that even Isaac didn't know. So it's interesting when you start looking at these women. Oftentimes they take great risks to ensure that the covenant continues into the next generation. The covenant that God made with Abraham and Sarah about many offspring, a land, and a relationship. And so today we're going to look at a couple of those. And I wanted to see if I can get this off the screen. Yeah, that might help. So the first person we're going to talk about is Tamar. Now you may have heard about Tamar, you may not. She usually doesn't show up in the lectionary if you preach lectionary. There are actually two Tamars in the Hebrew Bible. There's a Tamar who was the daughter of King David, whose brother raped her, and that started a family quarrel in which her real brother killed her half-brother who raped her, and David did nothing at all. So that's another story for another day. But the Tamar we're going to talk about is found in Genesis 38. Now, just to set the scene, this is when the people of the descendants of Abraham and Sarah have started to spread out. And one of the sons of Jacob and Rachel and Leah, whose name was Judah, had taken his family and moved to a farther away place. And while he was there, his wife had 3 sons. The name of the first one was the name of the second one was Onan, and the third was Shelah. And I always tell people, if you thought your parents named you a terrible name, be glad your name is not So they go, in this story, Judah and his sons and his wife are living among people that are not part of their lineage. And it's time to get a wife. And so he marries Tamar, who is a Canaanite woman, that is non-Israelite woman. And that would have not been the best idea in the ancient world. They tended to want to marry within their even tribe, but certainly a larger spectrum of marrying within their people. So she ends up at this point being the daughter-in-law of Judah, who was one of Jacob's sons, and has 3 sons, as I said. So she marries and we learn in the Bible, we get that insider information that is not a good guy. He does evil. And so what happens is she marries him and God strikes him dead. For whatever he did bad, it was very serious, and he dies. Now she is a widow. And the custom of the ancient world, at least as far as Israel wants us to know, is that if a man dies before his wife has produced an offspring, primarily a son, then his next living relative has to marry her. You may have heard of this. It's called lover marriage. So dies, and his brother, Onan, has to marry Tamar. But the deal is, if Tamar has children by Onan, they're technically offspring. And in the end, they would supplant Onan in the inheritance laws.
Oh my goodness.
So you can imagine how excited Onan was to take this on. And you can also imagine how excited Tamar is to have to marry another member of this family that don't seem to be the most upstanding men. So what happens is when they go to consummate the marriage, and let me just stop here and say, I hope you're not uncomfortable if I mention things like sex and seed and stuff like that, because you can't read the Hebrew Bible without talking about that stuff. So Onan goes in to consummate the marriage, but he doesn't want to reproduce with her, and so he spills his seed on the ground, and God strikes him down as well.
Onanism.
Exactly. You were the first person to get that. I don't know what that says, but usually I have to.
She's a nurse.
Very good. Yes, because he doesn't carry out what was his obligation is why he dies. And yes, that's how we get onanism. If you haven't seen it, look it up in the dictionary. And I always tell people, they used to tell you if you spilled your seed on the ground, you get hairy palms or you go blind. This would have been a much better story if you wanted people not to do that. So, anyway, there's one son left, Shelah. Now, imagine you are Judah, and you don't know that your sons are not good men. And you've lost two sons, and they both have one thing in common, Tamar. You might wonder if maybe Tamar is the problem. That, she might be one of those bad luck women, or maybe she murders her lovers. We don't know. And so he says, I am not going to marry Shelah to you right now. He's a little young. So you have to go back to your parents' home. And when Shelah gets at the right age, I'll come get you. Right. He has no intention of coming to get her because he doesn't want to lose his last son. So Tamar must have to go back to her family, but legally she is betrothed to Shelah, which means she can't marry anyone else. And going back to your home as an unmarried daughter or a childless woman who was married twice and has no offspring pretty much puts you at the bottom of the ranks in the household. It's not like you come in as the long-lost prodigal daughter and we're happy to have you home. It's not a desired location to be, and she is stuck because she can't do anything other than wait for a promise that's never going to come true. So in the meantime, we learn that Judah's wife, Shua, has died. And he goes through the mourning ritual that is required. And once that mourning time period is over, he decides it's time to get on with life, and he determines he's going to the sheep shearing festival in Timnah. Now, I don't know what was happening at the sheep shearing festival in Timnah, but that's the place he wants to go first after his mourning period. So he starts this trip, and Tamar hears that he's coming to Timnah, and she designs a plan. So she takes off her mourning clothes, dresses like a prostitute, which would probably include a veil across her face, and sits along the road to Timnah. And here comes Judah, making his way to Timnah, and he stops and sees this prostitute and thinks, it's been a long time. Maybe I should have a side trip while I'm on my way to Timnah. So he goes to the prostitute. He doesn't know who she is. And he asks to engage in her services. And she says, well, you have to pay me. And she wants a kid, not a human kid, an animal kid. And he says, well, I don't have that with me. Now you're thinking, if you're going to the sheep shearing festival and you don't have an animal with you. And so she says, well, then you'll have to leave something with me till you can bring payment. And he says, okay, what do you want? And so she says, I want your signet ring, which would have been unique. I want your cord that you wear around your robe. And I want your staff that you walk with. All of those are like giving someone your driver's license, your social security card, and a major credit card as an IOU. So he does that, and they do the business, and then he goes merrily along his way to Timnah, And when he gets back home, he says to his servant, hey, I need to get those things back. So take this animal, go to that road to Timnah. You'll see a prostitute on this corner and pay her so she can give me my stuff back. Well, when the servant goes, there's no prostitute. And in fact, he asks around and people say, there's never been a prostitute in this location. And so the servant comes home to Judah and says, I'm sorry, I couldn't find her. And Judah knows that somewhere in the area there is a prostitute who has his ring, his cord, and his staff. And I imagine he prays that that will never come out in any way. All right. Meanwhile, Tamar goes back home, takes off the prostitute garb, puts on the widow's garb, and waits in her parents' house. 3 months pass. And again, remember, Judah has no desire to marry his last son to Tamar. And suddenly, Judah gets word that Tamar is pregnant. And she's,
The plot thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you know, since she was betrothed, if she has had sex with another man, she has committed adultery. And she would be executed for adultery. And so Judah's like, this could solve my problem in many, many ways. And so, there you go. He decides to accuse her of adultery. She is arrested. And just as she's about to be brought out to be executed, she sends Judah a little care package and says, the man to whom these items belong is the father of my child. And so Judah opens the package, and there is his ring, his cord, and his staff. And he realizes he is the one that has really committed adultery because he has trespassed on this woman who was betrothed to his very own son. What are you going to do? If you say it was me, he would be killed along with Tamar. If he stays quiet, is he going to let Tamar go to her death? He has a dilemma. And so what he does is he calls off the execution and decides he will marry Tamar himself. And when he realizes what has happened and that Tamar has done this in order to get offspring, he makes a declaration that the fact that the biblical writers have a man say this is really astonishing. He says, she is more righteous than I. She is more righteous than I. That's a pretty powerful statement, especially when you're thinking about a woman who played the prostitute and slept with her father-in-law in order to get pregnant. Desperate times, desperate measures. And what's really amazing about Tamar is she gets pregnant. She gives birth to twins, and they end up being in the lineage of King David. And for Christians, even more remarkable, she ends up being in the lineage of Jesus. Yeah. A woman who played the prostitute, slept with her father-in-law, did all these things that we would probably declare her to be anything but righteous, right? In our society, unfortunately. Well, I taught a class on women in the Hebrew Bible, and they had to write an exegesis paper on some story that involved a female in the Hebrew Bible. And one of my students decided he wanted to do his exegesis of Genesis 38. So he did all his work, all his study, how to interpret the text. And the last part of their assignment was they had to do a practical application. A sermon, a Bible study, a youth group lesson, something to show how you'd use your knowledge of the exegesis in a practical way. So one day, this student had told me that he was going to write a sermon. I said, okay. And he shows up at my office very distraught. I said, okay, come in, have a seat. He said, I don't know what to do, Dr. D. I just don't know what to do about this sermon. I said, okay, tell me what you're wrestling with. And he said, am I supposed to proclaim from the pulpit that it's okay to commit adultery, to be a prostitute, to lie, to whatever you want to say? I don't think that'll go over in my congregation very well. Now, this was when I was in Kentucky, and knowing the small congregation where he was serving, it would not have gone over well at all. So I said, well, step back a minute. Let's think about this story. Rather than focusing on what Tamar did, why don't you look around and see who are the Tamars in our world today? Who are the women that fall through the cracks of society and end up having to do things they would never do if society had taken care of them? Women who are the victims of injustice, who might end up stealing to feed their children. Women who are victims of abuse, who might end up being in prostitution because that's the only skill they know they have. What if we preach a sermon about how do we meet the needs and prevent situations like Tamar today? And he said, yeah, that might preach. And I said, good.
Yeah.
So Tamar is one of those, she's not a child-free woman in the end, but her story tells you how dire it was for her to produce a son in order to fulfill her role and be accepted in society. But she is one of these women who did the unthinkable, because otherwise that covenant that Judah carried with him would never have made it to the next generation. So what do you think? Tamar? Good, bad? Can you think of other Tamars today in our society? Have I shocked and disgusted you so you don't want to say anything?
I'm actually thinking of there's legislation pending in Oklahoma for circumstances of abuse to be taken into account when a woman murders her partner, and it's facing resistance. So I would put that in the Tamar category for sure. And it's shocking that those factors can't be considered. The parole board can't consider it, and in sentencing it's not considered, even though we have a stand your ground law. It's often what happens in marriage happens in marriage, and we don't mess with it. So we have women in prison, and we incarcerate the second worst in the nation in terms of most women. And so this legislation would make the DAs take into account at sentencing these circumstances. There's a big push to resist retroactivity on this legislation, but so call your representatives and let them know that you support it and that you think it needs to be retroactive so that we can undo it.
So domestic violence is not as bad if the victim is a female. If the victim is a male, then to hell with it, right?
It's
Essentially.
it's not a good.
I'm sorry.
We're in a bad situation that this needs to be redressed, and so we have an opportunity now, and so call your representatives. Anyway.
For several years, I taught domestic violence awareness to the women in our jail, and one of my first students was a woman, exactly what John's talking about. She killed her very abusive husband, who abused her and beat her and her 2 young children. And I don't remember her name, but I'd like to see her.
Tamar.
Yeah.
Tamar, yeah. I think it was Michelle, but there's lots of Michelles. I'd like to see her exonerated.
Or at least have that taken into account in mitigating the sentence.
And you think this story in Genesis is at least from 500 BCE, probably much older.
We haven't learned any better.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How has life changed?
Stupid humans. I'm sorry.
In Deuteronomy, there's a set of commandments that deal with what we might call rape today. And interestingly enough, in Hebrew, there's no word for rape at all. I remember I heard a woman from some other country, I think, I don't know whether it's Iran or Iraq or one of those countries in that part of the world, who was being interviewed, and she said, we don't have a word for rape in our vocabulary. And she said, if you don't have a word for it, then it can't happen.
It doesn't exist.
And I thought, holy moly. And we have a word for it. And in those commandments, one of them says that if the guy takes the woman and has sex with her in the city, they both are killed because she didn't cry out, obviously. But if he takes her outside the city and has sex with her, only he is killed. And this is only if she's betrothed to another man. If she's not, then it's even different. Because she might have cried out and no one heard her. And when I read that and I think about what we hear today in rape trials, why were you in that part of town? Did you scream? Did you say stop? Nobody heard you. Why didn't you say something right away? I'm like, again, how many millennia, and we're still struggling with these same battles. And part of it is, although we laugh at the Hebrew Bible where women were considered property of their dads and their husbands or brothers if their dads died first, we still kind of think that way of women as property in particular parts of our country. We don't have to go to another country and cast blame on them until we clean up what's happening here in our own country. So, Tamar, remember her name, remember her story. I didn't bring the statistics, but like out of over 3,000 proper names in the Bible, like only 300 or less are women's names. And if you don't have a name, it is easy to overlook you. But when I teach my women in the Hebrew Bible class, our first activity is to divide into groups and go find women. And I give them each a book of the Bible, and I say, even if they don't have a name, you're to write down their presence. And when they're done, or when I call time, they're usually not finished with what they were doing. And we tape all those pages up on the wall, and we think, where are the women? They're there all the time. But they're known as somebody's mother, somebody's wife, or somebody's daughter, mother, wife, daughter. That's the other one I wanted. All right, let's move on to another rowdy broad that you probably have heard of, and that would be Rahab. What do you know about Rahab? Harlot, good. What else? Jericho.
Let the Israelites in.
Yeah, she let the Israelites in, so we might think of her as a double agent, spy.
Jesus' lineage.
Yeah. You see a theme here? Yeah. All right, so let's talk a little bit. I call Rahab a respectable prostitute, and here's why. First off, her story is found in Joshua 2, 1 through 24, and in Joshua 6, verses 1 and 2, and 15 through 25. So Joshua 2 is when the spies come looking to see the lay of the land in Jericho in order to know what their defenses are like and how to best prepare for the battle. Again, the role of prostitutes in the ancient world was that they were a necessary evil because men had to have some outlets. And while if a woman who is betrothed or married to a man has sex with another man, she's committed adultery. But if a man is married or betrothed and has sex with a woman who is not married or betrothed, that's not adultery. And that's what prostitutes were. They were free women. that men could engage their services if they needed extra outlets, and therefore they were a necessary evil. Now, they were never the respectable job, as I like to say. They didn't get a spot on the city square. They weren't in the Chamber of Commerce, probably, but they were there, and nobody was trying to stop it. It was just a reality. And in fact, we are told that Rahab's house is in the wall of the city. So, while that's a good location, you can think about accessibility to travelers. It also is a good location because people might not see you if you don't want to be seen visiting the prostitute house. But I think it's a symbol of her complete outsider status. Think about this. In the Hebrew Bible, she's a woman, which is not usually the primary character. She's not Israelite, and now she's a prostitute. We talk about intersectionality today. She has all these things that make her the ultimate outsider, both to the Israelites and to the people in Jericho. So we might understand why, when the spies show up, she's anxious to help them. So let's talk about that story in chapter 2. You know, the spies are sent to find out the lay of the land, and they just happen to go to the prostitute's house. Not certain why.
Easy access.
Huh?
Easy access.
Easy access. Maybe it's been a long time wandering in the wilderness all those years. Also think about the strategic placement you could have there, because think of all the people coming to see the prostitute who might talk while you're listening. And maybe there's a prostitute that with the right price would share some secrets with you. So they happen upon Rahab's house. There's also a part of scholarship that has thought that maybe Rahab's not a prostitute but a madam, that she runs the house. We also know her family lives with her, more than likely parents, siblings, etc. She has a business. She has a home. So they come, and the king of Jericho finds out that there are spies and that Rahab the prostitute is harboring them. So that's not good. The king decides to send his soldiers to Rahab's place and get these spies and bring them back to him. Well, when the soldiers show up, Rahab takes the spies and puts them up on the roof and covers them up and hides them so they can't be found. And then she goes and answers the door, and when the king's soldiers say, "Where are the spies that came tonight?" she says, "They're not here anymore. They went that way. And if you hurry, you might catch them." She has just committed treason. She has sold out her own people. And as I said, the more I know about how Rahab may have been treated, I would think that I would be willing to commit treason against these people. So after the king's men go rushing off in the wrong direction, she goes up to the roof and she says to them, "Look, I know your God is amazingly powerful. I've heard about all your success, and this God must be the reason for it, because they're not a fully established military army." And she says, "So here's what I want you to do. I have hidden you. Now you need to promise me that when you come to destroy the city, you will take me and my whole household out before you do it." So she knows how to strike a bargain. I saved your life.
She's a prostitute. How could she not? Sorry.
Well, I like to think of her as a businesswoman,
Okay.
because prostitute sometimes gets that negative idea. And so they say, "Sure, we'll do that." And they say, "But you can't tell anybody that we've been here or what you think's going to happen." And she agrees to stay silent. And then they say, "Here, take this red cord and tie it around your window so we can see it from the outside, and we'll know where to go to get you when we attack the city, and make certain everybody you want saved is in your home. Now, I love to stop and think about that red cord, which shows up in other places, but in this particular place, I think it's probably at the root of a red light district. I don't know if every town has those anymore, but there was a time where red light district was where you went to find your evening's fun. As a matter of fact, when we were living in Lynchburg, Virginia, we bought a house that originally was where First Christian Church Lynchburg began, but after that happened, it became a brothel. And the neighborhood where we were was known as the Red Light District. Then it became a speakeasy and ultimately was converted back into a home. But it was the best house, most character. I loved it. But yeah, it was built in like 1850. A historical landmark that had been renovated on the back, so you didn't know it was renovated till you went inside. Anyway, I digress. But the Red Light District, hang this red cord out of the window. And so sure enough, when they attack the city of Jericho, Joshua sends in people to bring her whole household out and keep her safe before they destroy the city. Now, I'll say right now that I'd like to talk about destroying the city, but that's not the topic. Just, I will say that there is no evidence that Jericho existed as a walled city around this time, and there's no evidence archaeologically that there was ever this destruction where the walls came tumbling down. So I hope that doesn't destroy your faith. For some people it does, honestly. So this is probably a story about something metaphorically rather than some sort of actual attack and destruction of people, though it doesn't make it better because the story's still there. So I always say that Rahab is an outsider who becomes an insider for Israel. And at this point in Joshua and Judges, they are trying to figure out who's in and who's out and how do we identify ourselves. She's remarkable, cunning, quick-witted, assertive, responsible. And as you mentioned, she's part of Jesus' lineage. And according to rabbinic tradition, she married Joshua and was the ancestor of 8 prophets, including Huldah and Jeremiah. Pretty good resume right there. But you notice I have her as a one gutsy broad, so let me explain that. In Hebrew, often the names of characters in the story have meaning, extra meaning. And the word in Hebrew, Rahav, actually has the meaning of broad or wide open, which is particularly important because the word for Egypt, Mitzrayim, means narrow place. And so when I learned that, I thought, well, you know, Rahab did have a very broad vision of what could be. She saw something in people that her community would destroy that she liked. Maybe she liked the idea of a God who could take a ragtag army of people and make them into a great nation. But I also like her name because there's also another use for the word broad. Have you ever heard of a woman called broad? Mm-hmm. Now, I'll admit, a lot of people find that an insult, but I don't. Because I reserve that word broad for women who are assertive, who have vision, who are willing to do what has to be done, the dirty work if it has to be done. And so for me, to call Rahab one gutsy broad is a really great compliment in my book. Now you may disagree. Oh, did we lose something? It says I'm connecting here. Oh no.
Our Wi-Fi is occasionally.
They're probably telling someone that they're not on screen. Now we're waiting for that to connect. What are your thoughts or comments? Anything?
Well, I've been often called a pushy broad, and I think that's okay.
That's right. I do too. I mean, when,
Why are you laughing?
have you uttered those words, maybe? I've been called that too, and much worse. But at least that I can claim. Yeah, and since you've probably studied before the women in Matthew's genealogy, Tamar, Rahab, Bathsheba, and who's another, what did I just? Ruth, thank you, good Lord. Main book. And when we look at those women, we learn that at least Tamar, Rahab, and Ruth are non-Israelites. They're outsiders. And there's some debate about Bathsheba. She could be an outsider, a wife of David's from the land of Sheba. It means daughter of Sheba. So she's an outsider as well. They're all women who have some reputation that's not positive. Though I will tell you, if we had time to look at Bathsheba, we'd correct that misunderstanding. So these women are not the ones that most people would trot out as the best ancestors of their King David or later of Jesus. And I wonder why. And part of me thinks that maybe Matthew decided to do that because
Hey guys, we're gonna use the phone for the audio. Okay.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
that the gospel writer of Matthew is trying to kind of foreshadow the direction of Jesus' ministry. That he will go to the people that society says shouldn't be tended to. He will go to the people that everybody thinks are unsalvageable, and he will dine with them, he will talk with them. And so for me, that is part of the power of Matthew's genealogy. All right, got 15 minutes. Let's do a quick one on another well-known woman, but this is one of the women in my book who is a child-free woman in the Hebrew Bible, and that is Deborah. And let me just stop and say, first off, I have nothing wrong with women who have children. I had a mother. She died a year ago. I miss her terribly. Both my sisters are mothers. Most of my friends are mothers. So there's nothing against mothers, but there are
best friends are mothers.
They are, exactly. That's what I was going to say. And when I did this research and had the idea of the book, it was partially a little selfish because of my experience of being child-free, but it also was due to the fact that I got to thinking that when ministers preach, particularly something like Genesis stories, and all you hear is God opening and closing wombs, and when a woman finally has a child, she's a made woman. How many people in the congregation, either by circumstance or choice, could not be mothers or would not be mothers? That's got to be a little grating after a while, because the implication is, oh, God's closing your womb. And I've heard people say this, so I'm not making this stuff up. And so I thought, what if we can lift up some of these female characters that we don't have to talk about their reproductive abilities, but can talk about skills that other women might want to claim today. I always write a little piece on Facebook the week of Mother's Day to remind people that if they're going to celebrate Mother's Day in their churches, remember, not everybody's a mother by choice or circumstance. Not everybody had a great mother that they want to celebrate, and some are mourning their mothers, so let's just kind of put that aside. And in fact, most people don't know, but you all probably do, that Mother's Day was originally a day to talk about peace, not about reproductive mothers. So, all right, that's my side note. So let's talk briefly about Deborah. We probably have heard of her. We probably know she's a judge, right? Yes, no, maybe not.
Yeah.
There are two versions of her story. Judges 4 is prose, and Judges 5 is a poetic account, and there are differences when you compare them. The question comes, was she married even? The words that come after her name is Eshet Lapidot, which traditionally are translated as wife of Lapidot. Now, another Hebrew lesson, I love to teach Hebrew along the way, is that in Hebrew, the word for woman is the same word used for wife. There's not another word for wife. Same thing with man and husband. So when it says Eshet Lapidot, we just assume that means wife of a guy named Lapidot. However, we have never found a name that is Lapidot in the Hebrew Bible or in other extra-biblical texts. So you go back and you look, and Lapidot actually can be translated as flames or lightning or fire. Sometimes it's related to the lighting of the altar candles, etc. So in the past, they wouldn't have had candles. It would have been oil lamp. And so what if we take off our glasses that assume what Deborah is and think about, what if we said Deborah, woman of flames, or woman of lightning, or fiery woman? I like that one. And you know, if she's married, why didn't her husband show up anywhere else? Anyway, her story, I'm going backwards instead of forward. Sorry about that. We know she's a judge, though she's not the charismatic judge that we see in many places in Judges. She's more judicial in her function. People come to her to settle disputes. She's a prophet, the second woman in the Hebrew Bible to be named a prophet. And she's really only known for one prophetic utterance if you need a prophet to say something about the future. And that's when she delivers the message to Barak, the commander of the army, that King Jabin, who was about to defeat the Israelites, will now be defeated by them. And she's a military commander. Because remember, when she tells Barak this, and go into battle, you'll be successful, Barak's like, they have chariots, they have this. So let's just see how certain you are. Put your life where your mouth is. And so she goes with them into battle. So she's also a military person, which again, we don't think of in the Hebrew Bible, but other cultures had female warriors all the time. And so in all three of those roles, you notice what's missing, right? Never a mother. Except in that Judges 5 poetic text, there's a line towards the end that says, a mother in Israel. And people think, well, maybe that's a hint that she had children, though I wonder how she could have had time to have children when you're a judge and a prophet and military commander in the days before any kind of childcare, etc. And yet, when we look at that phrase, a mother in Israel, the other two times it's used in the Hebrew Bible, it's talking about a city, not a female. So it might have been an honorific title, or in my kind of cynical view, maybe they weren't happy until they made her a mother so she could meet the job she was created to do. Just my particular thought on that. Thoughts?
Can you find interpolations in the Hebrew text that indicate that they might be trying to change the story?
No, I haven't. I don't know. And again, it's seen as two separate sources. The prose is one source, the poetic is another source. The poetic source would probably be dated a little earlier because poetry was more part of an oral tradition. But if I don't want to argue they inserted it to make her whole, I do go back to this idea that that phrase, mother in Israel, is never used to refer to a female, only a city. So, it's just a thought. But I have my midrashic cynical brain in there saying, and that you called me a judge, you called me a prophet, you called me a military warrior, and I was not enough. And then you call me a mother, and finally, I was enough.
Wow.
That's a line from my book. If you're interested in it, like I said, more than a womb, divine, child-free women as agents of the holy, maybe. I can never remember what I decided with that last title. Because I really wanted the title to be more than a womb, put the B in parentheses, man. More than a womb man. But the publisher thought that was not really easy to do, and so we settled on more than a womb. And when you know, later I found something online where somebody actually wrote a piece called More Than a Womb Man. But there you go. The other women I cover in my book are Miriam. So Miriam, Deborah, Esther, and Huldah, the prophet, who read the scroll found during Josiah's reform. So she was literate and a prophet. She does have a husband, but it reads like, she consults with the king's advisors and he does the laundry, because it says he's the royal wardrobe keeper. Just a thought.
That's great.
Yeah. And then I also talk about some unnamed women. The wise woman of Tekoa, story about how she talked David into reconciling, hopefully with his son, who was on the run. The wise woman of Abel, who saved her city, but did kill have someone killed and thrown to the army. And then the medium of Endor, which she is mostly known as Witch. If you're ever interested, I'll come back and talk about her. She's a great Halloween story.
That's fun.
But I make the case that she actually ministers to King Saul, feeds him his last meal before he is killed in battle. And it's got a lot of ritualistic language involved. And, some people's necromancy, consulting the dead, might be another person's prophecy. Because remember, she calls forth Samuel, and he says that the battle will go against Saul. And I always wonder, it doesn't say where the voice came from. Like, was it through her? Was she throwing Samuel's voice or what? But she's a great story. So I'm happy to come back and talk about her and any other woman in the Hebrew Bible you might want to do. And if you,
Give a date.
yeah. And next spring, I'm actually teaching women in the Hebrew Bible. It's a 2-weekend, Thursday, Friday, Saturday class, and anyone's welcome to audit the class if you're interested. You don't have to do the work. You just get to have the fun.
Wow.
Don't have to write the paper.
That's good.
All right, so any other comment or question you want to ask? We're getting close to, yes, ma'am.
Is your book,
No, you
I
go
didn't-
ahead, no.
well, I wanna buy your book, where can I buy?
It's on Amazon.
Okay.
If you just type in More Than a Womb, it's the only thing that come up.
The only thing that will come up. And a couple of books, right?
Yeah,
first was-
the Preaching the Women of the Bible, unfortunately, is now only an e-book.
Okay.
Chalice Press that published it decided they were going to make it just an e-book. But you can actually get a tangible copy if you want. It's got beautiful cover art that I didn't pick, just so you know. And it's a short book, and actually I think it, along with my Preaching the Women of the Bible, was more intended for Bible study, church school lessons. Not so much like the first one. I didn't want to call it Preaching the Women of the Bible, but again, editors, publishers. So it has exegetical work as well as, things that you can, I don't ask questions, but in my book on More Than a Womb, at the end of each chapter, I hadn't intended to do this, but it came to me towards the end. I write a little midrashic poem for each of the women in the book. So at the end of Deborah's chapter, there's one, and Miriam, etc.
Okay, what were you gonna say?
Oh, two things. Your images in your PowerPoint are beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank
Are
you.
they
They are.
Thank you.
just ones that you selected among
Yeah,
modern biblical?
and I have the copyright information in my notes. So if you're interested in the PowerPoint, though, I can only share it with you without the images.
Sure.
But
Okay.
yeah, I just did a search for like Deborah, and this is what came.
That's gorgeous.
They just,
And the Chagalls earlier were great.
Yeah, and then I didn't talk about her partner in crime, Jael, the woman who killed Sisera. But that's again another fun story for another time.
Was that the tent stake?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I actually
That's
got a
good.
preview of the slides and we're missing some stuff. Good
Here, I'll
stuff.
just give you a little picture.
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah, it's pretty grim, but
Um,
yeah.
and then my favorites are here.
Yeah, that is. So isn't there an apocryphal story as well?
Judith.
Yeah, Judith.
I
thank
I
you.
was going to ask about that.
Yeah,
So many
same sort of thing.
artists in the
Yeah.
1800s and even I think late 1700s did Judith in Hollow Furnace.
Right.
They did a lot of operas about her. They did plays and they did artwork. And one thing some people don't know is that in the old style deck of cards, the Queen of Hearts is Judith. Because you may
Oh.
remember the old ones had a sword and looked like somebody being held by their hair.
Oh my
That
goodness.
was Judith. And so if you have any of those old playing cards, go see, because it changed after a while.
Wow.
But
This
all
is
right, well,
wonderful.
I'm gonna stop there. Thank you all for your
Oh my goodness,
attention.
thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And if you didn't get tired of hearing my voice, I'll be preaching upstairs. But I'm preaching on a female, but not someone we talked about.
That's great.
I will
That's
leave
wonderful.
that there, and
All right, thanks everyone online.
yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Something else I have to say.